interpretación íntegra y de calidad.
Excellence.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I call to order the seventh meeting of the 58th session of the Human Rights Council. We will now continue with the high-level segment, and it is my honor to give the floor to His Excellency Tim Watts, Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs of Australia.
High Commissioner, President, Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished representatives. 2025 marks the 80th anniversary of the Charter of the United Nations. The Charter commits all member states to work cooperatively to solve international challenges. It commits us all to respect, promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, irrespective of where we were born, our race, our gender or our religion. No state is above fair scrutiny. And in 2024, Australia welcomed visits from the Special Rapporteurs from Myanmar, privacy and contemporary forms of slavery. Together, we must continue to strengthen the multilateral human rights system and protect the principles it's built on: universality, indivisibility and non-discrimination. As home to one of the oldest enduring cultures on the planet, Australia welcomes Indigenous peoples' increased participation in the work of the Council. Pacific Islands countries are also essential in shaping the system to ensure that it serves the needs of small island states. The world faces enormous challenges, including the largest number of conflicts since World War II. And Australia welcomes the announcement of a ceasefire and hostage agreement in Gaza and urges all parties to respect its terms and for all phases of the deal to be implemented in full. We want to see the enormous suffering in Gaza alleviated, civilians protected and all the hostages released. 3 years into Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, we continue to see Russia's blatant disregard for its international humanitarian law and international human rights law obligations. The deployment of thousands of North Korean troops to fight alongside Russian forces is a dangerous escalation of Russia's illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine. We reiterate our calls on Russia to adhere to its obligation under international human rights law and international humanitarian law and put an end to its senseless war. Human rights underpin peace and security and are critical for realising the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Yet human rights violations continue. Australia remains gravely concerned by the human rights violations against Uyghurs, Tibetans and other minorities in Xinjiang, Tibet and across China, as well as the erosion of rights and freedoms in Hong Kong. Australia continues to call on China to address the credible findings of UN experts, including the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. The sustained and systemic oppression of women and girls in Afghanistan by the Taliban is a deplorable attempt to erase them from public life. This is why Australia, together with partners, has commenced international action against Afghanistan for violations of the CEDAW Convention. And we call on Afghanistan to reverse its egregious decisions and practices restricting the human rights of women and girls. 2024 was the deadliest year on record for humanitarian personnel. In Australia, together with partners, established the Ministerial Group for the Protection of Humanitarian Personnel. This group is driving work on a new declaration open to all member states to reinforce international humanitarian law and drive action to protect the lives and human rights of humanitarian personnel in conflict zones. Australia will continue to advocate for the global abolition of the death penalty. We remain deeply disturbed by Iran's extensive and persistent use of the death penalty, including for women and girls, juvenile offenders, political opponents, protesters, and ethnic and religious minorities. Climate change is the single greatest shared threat to all countries. Australia remains deeply concerned about the detrimental effects of climate change on human rights, including the acute impacts on Pacific nations. We recognise the leadership of the Pacific in driving global climate action. and are partnering with the Pacific in our bid to deliver a COP in 2026 that brings profile to the region's unique challenges, elevates Pacific voices, and it accelerates global action on climate. The challenges are many. We cannot work in isolation. The multilateral human rights system depends on the commitment from all states to work together to realise a just, inclusive, and peaceful world that respects the human rights of all.
Thank you. I now request the contribution of Her Excellency Ms. Roberta Clark, Chairperson of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, also by video.
My name is Roberta Clark, and I bring greetings from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And I want to thank President Lauber for his invitation to participate in this high-level panel discussion on human rights mainstreaming, focusing on the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. Over the past 3 decades, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has been committed to promoting and protecting women's rights across the Americas and the Caribbean, including as framed by the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. This platform embodies the notion of interdependence of rights. The member states and civil society organizations, including women's organizations, who crafted the platform understood, for example, that the right to education enabled participation in public life. And with such participation, women could influence the shape and benefits of the economy and of governance structures, enhance access to essential services. It is worth recalling that the Beijing Platform for Action contains analyses of the global political economy and of the impact of production and consumption patterns on the environment, and indeed of militarization. The platform calls attention to unequal power dynamics, not only between women and men, but also between countries. The platform has a transformative vision. As we reflect on its impact in this 30th anniversary year, we recognize advancements such as the adoption of laws, policies, and international conventions aimed at protecting women's rights to lives free of violence, to decent work, to accessible health, justice, and education, for example. We note the establishment of institutions to monitor and enforce gender equality measures, and the implementation of outreach and education to change societal attitudes that perpetuate discrimination and violence against women. But despite these strides, no country has achieved gender equality, none. Progress has been slow, and indeed, one might even say has stagnated. Rates of gender-based violence, including in situations of conflict, remain high, despite normative developments and some investment in the justice sector to combat impunity. Even the true extent of this violence remains unknown due to underreporting and the persistent lack of data collection, particularly regarding Indigenous, Afro-descendant, migrant, LGBTI, and older women, as well as women and girls with disabilities. We must ask and answer the question, what else should we be doing to end the culture of patriarchy and misogyny that drives violence against women and girls? Across the Americas and the Caribbean, as in other regions, we see signs of regression and threats to roll back hard-won rights, especially those affecting the most marginalized because of intersectional discrimination. Now is the time to push back against the threat of regression. Now is the time for the multilateral system to re-energize against what amounts to minority perspectives. We know the regressive pushback does not represent most member states as the outcome of the recently concluded regional reviews of the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action bear out. Now is the time for stronger political will and greater accountability to uphold these Beijing commitments. By embracing intersectionality and implementing transformative measures with adequate investments, we can realize for all women and girls a world without crippling poverty, free from violence, with peace and security, and the right to fully participate in decision-making about the future of their communities, their states, and indeed the world. I thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this way in this important high-level panel.
Thank you. I now invite the contribution of His Excellency Mr. Edmund Bon-Tai-Sun, Chair of the Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights of ASEAN.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the United Nations Human Rights Council President, Excellency York Lober, for inviting me as chair of the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, IACHR, to say a few words at this high-level segment. I understand this is the first time an IACHR chair has addressed the segment. I am honored. Excellencies, the world we live in today is a dangerous place. Conflicts, wars, bombings, genocide, famine, climate change, forced displacements are just some of the troubling developments dominating our news. Some nations deliberately ignore international law, while others pretend to uphold human rights while actively committing violations. Worse still, others pick and choose what they wish to follow. But as we witness these challenges, human rights is a powerful tool to defend individuals from unjust practices. The individuals who most need human rights are also the most powerless and voiceless in society. Those living in poverty, those ostracized, the journalist threatened with jail for expressing his views, the parent whose child is lost to disease, the student punished for organizing a peaceful assembly, the woman whose employment is terminated because she's pregnant, the indigenous community whose land is taken away unfairly, those living in the shadow of the gallows. Surely these are important matters worth fighting for. Excellencies, I'm here before you today as a representative of a commission deeply committed to promoting and protecting human rights. Every day we work with a clear purpose to innovate and evolve our strategies to promote, protect, and uplift the human rights of current and future generations. Excellencies, 2025 marks a historic year for Malaysia and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. In 2015, Malaysia chaired ASEAN when the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 Forging Ahead Together was adopted. This year, ASEAN will adopt a new vision for the next 20 years. Malaysia's guiding ASEAN theme of inclusivity and sustainability is at the heart of Malaysia's Madani concept. Inclusivity is not merely a goal, it is a call to action. It demands that we listen to those made vulnerable and marginalized. They include women, children, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, orang asli, orang asal, migrant workers, refugees, asylum seekers, stateless persons, ethnic, religious, linguistic, and gender minorities, and human rights and environmental rights defenders. It is when we design processes that work well for those at most disadvantaged that we know that these will work to advance human rights for all. Sustainability has at its core the respect for human and environmental rights. We must ensure that today's development does not compromise future generations' dignity, rights, and needs. Since its inception in 2009, IACHR has worked tirelessly to advance human rights through strategic initiatives. Despite facing challenges and criticisms, I'm proud of IACHR's convening power and reach to work for human rights. This year, IACHR will continue to champion an ASEAN-led and ASEAN-owned whole of ASEAN approach to promote peace, inclusive growth, and sustainable development. Excellencies, human rights practitioners must be prepared to face resistance. Many do not like human rights. They fear it because it holds dictators and abusers accountable. They fear it because human rights speak of uncomfortable realities and proofs. They fear it because human rights challenges power. But we must never shy away. Human rights are non-negotiable. We must not delude ourselves into thinking that we will have no detractors. But if IACHR continues to be partisan for human rights, and we can enjoy the support of international human rights institutions such as this Council, we have nothing to fear. We share a common interest in a robust human rights mechanism that will treat all individuals with dignity, regardless of their background, identity, or status. Excellencies, I commend the Human Rights Council for its efforts to further its relationship with the IACHR. We can learn from each other. During our leadership of ASEAN, we will leave no stone unturned. I continue to remain optimistic about human rights. There will always be those who will mischaracterize human rights for their interests or agendas. We have little time for them. Instead, we will spend time fighting against abusers and urge the Human Rights Council to do the same. Let us be courageous in the face of adversity, knowing that if we keep knocking hard enough and often enough, the doors to peace and justice will eventually open. Human rights are worth fighting for. Let's fight for it together. Thank you.
Thank you. Avec cette déclaration,
This statement marks the end of the list of speakers under the high-level segment, and I wish to thank all delegations for their participation. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, we shall now begin the general segment. I would like to remind you that the speaking time for the general segment is of 3 minutes for council members and 2 minutes for observers. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vietnam. Allow me at the outset to congratulate you on your election to the presidency of the Human Rights Council. You can count on my delegation's full support. Vietnam reaffirms its commitment to the protection and promotion of human rights. As a responsible member of the international community, we are continuing to constructively work with UN human rights mechanisms. In September 2024, Vietnam concluded its fourth UPR with you, and we are currently drawing up a national action plan for implementing the recommendations we accepted under the UPR. We have a national report on implementation of the recommendations and other measures in March 2025, and we will also have reports to be submitted to various treaty bodies this year. In 2024, despite major challenges, our economic growth exceeded 7%. The multidimensional poverty rate fell to around 1.9%, and healthcare coverage has extended, and we have provided better quality services at the national level. We are anticipating economic growth of over 8% for this year, which will lead to double-digit growth as of 2026 and better conditions for protecting and promoting human rights. Climate change remains one of the most significant challenges of our era. Vietnam is particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Therefore, we intend to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and to ensure a fair energy transition. During the 56th Human Rights Council session, Vietnam, Bangladesh and the Philippines submitted the annual resolution on human rights and climate change. This focused on a just transition. Building on our commitment to human rights, Vietnam has decided to once again stand for election for the Human Rights Council for the 2026-2028 period. This candidacy has been unanimously supported by ASEAN. We stand ready to cooperate with all our partners in order to promote an inclusive and constructive human rights agenda that is based on cooperation and dialogue. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of France. Thank you, President. President, there will be no peace on this planet as long as human rights violations occur anywhere in this world. These are words that were written by Mr. Azam, and it reminds us all that respect for human rights is fundamental for peace. It is for peace that we will continue to document human rights violations committed by the Russian Federation since it's invaded Ukraine. A pseudo-settlement of the conflict imposed on Ukraine without taking into account Ukrainians' needs will have no future. On the contrary, it would pave the way to the wars of tomorrow. Europe's security is at stake as well and will take part in all negotiations for a settlement, and we will continue our efforts to achieve lasting and sustainable peace. It is for the sake of peace that we need to support the ceasefire in Gaza and promote the release of all hostages. A two-state solution is the only solution to this conflict, which for so many years has been pitting Israelis against Palestinians. It is the only solution which can ensure the legitimate aspirations of both peoples to peace and security. France will co-chair with Saudi Arabia a conference on this topic next June in New York. Our President of France said so on the 13th of February. In the presence of the transitional authorities. It is for the sake of peace that the international community should support a just transitional policy in Syria, which represents all of the Syrian people in all its segments and that respects the rights of everyone. In order to contribute to the success of the transition, on the 24th of February, Europe lifted sanctions in major sectors such as energy or transport, crucial for reconstruction. The multilateral system is working working hard, and Europe is there to offer its irreplaceable expertise, including in the struggle against impunity. It is for peace that the Council met during extraordinary sessions to call for a cessation of hostilities and a return to negotiations and for the protection of civilians and respect for human rights in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in Sudan, where millions of innocent civilians are suffering from ongoing conflicts. It is for the sake of peace that the Human Rights Council should continue to document crimes committed in Burma and Afghanistan, where rights are violated on a massive scale by repressive regimes, and we are all aware of the tragic impacts of these on the most vulnerable of us. It is for the sake of peace that we advocate for women and girls' equality, and France will hold a session on the importance of ensuring women's participation in decision-making processes. It is for peace that we support multilateralism, international law, and the values of cooperation and solidarity. France is hard at work. Yesterday, we organized a joint session on enforced disappearances, and we are hosting an action on artificial intelligence tomorrow. There will also be the annual meeting of feminist diplomats and the 9th Global Congress against the death penalty. President, effective multilateralism is something that this Council should always seek to better embody. I thank you.
Monsieur le Président,
President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Benin is proud to sit here as a member for its second consecutive mandate in this unique forum, which embodies multilateralism in its noblest and most universal aspiration to protect and promote human rights. This ambition is under threat because of a juxtaposition of crises and conflicts which are leading to massive human rights violations in many areas of our world. That is why my country would like to reaffirm its unwavering commitment to peace, security, democracy, and the rule of law that are the sine qua non guarantees of respect of these fundamental rights. Benin will therefore, during its second mandate, continue to strengthen this Council's work for a holistic approach to human rights, one that guarantees that every person, wherever they may be, may live free from fear and need. It is in the name of this ideal that when my country was re-elected, it made 3 voluntary commitments, which we are already implementing through various institutional and regulatory measures. Under the leadership of our presidency, Benin has, since 2013, embarked on a course of growth and development, which is consolidating day after day, and this reaffirms our unflinching will to take responsibility for our own destiny. Since 2019, Benin has been a lower middle-income country, and Benin has achieved year-on-year robust economic growth, which has in turn yielded tangible progress in the areas of education, healthcare, access to drinking water, electricity, food security, nutrition, and infrastructure. Currently, my country is facing a growing security challenge because of the spread of terrorism from the Sahel. I would like to reaffirm my government's determination to defend these achievements across our national territory. It is with this in mind that we invited and hosted from the 18th to the 27th of November 2024, the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on the protection and promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the context of the anti-terrorist struggle. In coherence with our commitment towards this Council and its mechanisms, my country will continue to work with the Special Rapporteurs, and we will also continue to support a Pan-Africanism which helps to protect and promote all people of African descent, and we will ensure that we can grant visas to all Africans and also ensure that all people of African descent may acquire citizenship when they require it. Benin would also like to continue joint work on this topic and others so as to ensure that the work done to protect and promote human rights truly serve the general interest and flourishment of human people, far from any political instrumentalization. Thank you. I give the floor to the Sovereign Order of Malta.
Mr. President, the Sovereign Order of Malta expresses its deep concern over the erosion of international humanitarian and human rights law. These principles are fundamental to peace, justice, and the protection of human dignity, particularly in times of conflict and crisis. As the Secretary General emphasized in his opening remarks, Respect for the rule of law is essential to maintaining stability, fostering justice, and safeguarding the most vulnerable. As a long-standing humanitarian actor, we remain strongly committed to multilateralism as a guarantee for security, cooperation, and effective humanitarian action. Global challenges require collective responses, and all efforts should be guided by mutual respect, dialogue, and diplomacy, rather than the use of force. Upholding these principles is key to resolving disputes, achieving lasting peace and social cohesion. The Order of Malta advocates for human rights worldwide through its humanitarian action in the fields of assistance to displaced persons, medical and healthcare services, disaster relief and emergency response, defending religious freedom and human dignity, anti-human trafficking initiatives, social inclusion, and help for the poor. It operates in many of the areas of special concern to this Council, such as Ukraine, Palestine, Myanmar, the DRC, Venezuela, Haiti, to name just a few. At the same time, we recognize the transformative role of new technologies, particularly artificial intelligence, in strengthening humanitarian work. AI is improving healthcare, education, crisis prevention, and humanitarian response, but its use must align with ethical standards and fundamental rights. We support the initiatives of the Human Rights Council in this field and encourage further dialogue between all stakeholders. The Order of Malta remains committed to promoting the respect of international humanitarian law and protecting those in need. We will continue to work alongside states, international organizations, and civil society to ensure that humanitarian aid reaches those most affected by conflict and disaster. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
Mr. President, Lebanon is a small country, but it prides itself on a long-standing history and civilization. Lebanon has never been a belligerent country, but given its location in the Middle East, it is in a highly sensitive geographical point that is fraught with tensions. We have suffered across centuries, including today. We are witnessing the repercussions of the Israeli aggression that has targeted the country and led to destruction of infrastructure and also led to thousands of victims and has exhausted the Lebanese people. But the Lebanese people will always stand up and will always cling to plurality, human rights, and dialogue. And this commitment in Lebanon is one of the secrets of its longevity and its friendship with its Arab brothers and the recognition of the world as to the symbolism of its action. On this basis, Lebanon has most recently been a theater for some positive developments that have brought to an end the constitutional standstill in a democratic fashion and has re-established authority and political work. The president of the nation and the premiership are working towards ensuring the necessary reforms and putting the country on track for combating corruption and reestablishing stability. And this is why we highly commend the work of the High Commissioner during his visit to Lebanon, and we're sure that he has been able to sense the seriousness of Lebanese officials in working towards promoting human rights and his cooperation with the country, as well as our cooperation with the international frameworks. Lebanon is continuing on its collaboration with the international community to collaboratively overcome the challenges and crises, including now the reconstruction and obligating Israel, the occupying power, to end its aggression and abide by the resolution of the Security Council 1701, particularly that, and there's a...
It appears there's a problem with the interpretation to French.
Mais pour le prochain, on aura la traduction.
French should be on channel 3. The interpreters were working.
Je m'excuse auprès du représentant permanent du Liban, auprès de la communauté francophone.
My apologies to the delegation of Lebanon and the French-speaking listeners. We are just ascertaining what is happening with the Secretariat.
OK. On est bon maintenant?
Let us continue. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Oman, hoping to hear the French interpretation as well.
We congratulate you, President, for presiding over the Council, and we thank all the organizers around this dialogue that sheds light on some vital issues that pertain to international peace and security. We're still witnessing the repercussions of the war in Gaza with great concern, and the tremendous loss of life over the past 13 months. This war has unveiled that the human rights principles that should be our frame of reference are nothing more than slogans that are utilized by some for their own purposes, which now try to justify the forced eviction and the genocide against the Palestinian people and the scourge of that. We are at a crossroads, Mr. President. Do we want an international community that is based on mutual respect, collaboration, and compliance to international law and the protection of human rights for all peoples? Or do we want a world where we have human rights discrepancies, with some peoples having a dignified life while others are deprived of the most basic rights, and they are displaced and being subjected to genocide with impunity? It is high time that we renew the work of UN mechanisms, including the Human Rights Council, so that these mechanisms are more representative and efficient in dealing with the critical issues, and so that these institutions are a platform for sustainable peace. My country believes that bringing together the efforts of the international community is of the essence to be able to overcome the challenges of the multilateral system at present. We need to cling to objective criteria, away from selectivity and politicization. This will bring back confidence in the multilateral system and will bring us forward to a world where peace and security reign and human dignity are respected. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Honduras.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, President. Honduras wishes to reiterate its commitment to the respect and protection of human rights throughout the world, and we're honored to comply with our international obligations on human rights in our own country. We do this through a series of measures as a way of guaranteeing peace and development of our nation. The government of our President Xiomara Castro has successfully promoted policies to achieve environmental and climate justice and economic and social justice. We have a rehabilitation of protected areas, the implementation of recovery and reforestation programs, and this has been essential in making progress towards sustainable development in harmony with nature. We have seen recent onslaughts against the human rights of migrants, and we've been implementing a national emergency strategy for the protection of Honduran migrants that aims to respect human dignity, non-criminalization, and the rights of migrants in an irregular situation, as well as in transit and returnees. We've been furthering the implementation of transitional justice programs for memory, truth, reparation, and justice for the victims of human rights violations in the past. We currently have the highest social and public investment programs in the history of our country, which has had a significant impact on the right to education, to food, housing, and energy as human rights. We have identified technical assistance and international cooperation as a priority, and so we have an open invitation to special procedures. And this week we've confirmed the 7th country visit in only 3 years. We have also held 5 dialogues with the treaty bodies. And we very much hope to have your support during our UPR in November. We support the appeal to support rigorously the mandate of this Council through dialogue and multilateralism based on mutual respect and international solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bosnia and Herzegovina appreciates the opportunity at this important meeting to highlight the certain serious violation of human rights that are being perpetrated against the citizens of BIH, which I will call BIH for brevity's sake. International law guarantees BIH citizens, like all people, a fundamental right to democratic self-governance. This important principle is enshrined in, for example, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the first protocol to European Convention on Human Rights and the UN Charter. As US President Trump has recognized, meddling by foreign parties in the country's democratic political processes through the covert funding and operation of organizations that seek to manipulate the electorate constitutes a grave violation of this human right. I know that in my country, at least in Republic of Srpska, President Dodik and the other leaders in Banja Luka agrees with the President Trump 100%. Some other BIH leaders in Sarajevo may not share the view. However, it is well known that its so-called a non-governmental organization may have a noble-sounding name by the hiding its control by a foreign intelligence agency, a billionaire ideology, or another powerful foreign actor. In democracy, transparency of such an influence is essential. While the meddling of foreign-founded organization in BIH politics is a major human rights concern for my country, there is a far more serious violation of the right of democratic self-government in BIH. A former German bureaucrat named Christian Schmidt, who claims the title of High Representative in BIH, brutally imposed laws on the citizens of BIH by decree, in flagrant violation of democratic processes set out in BIH Constitution, agreed at the Dayton. Mr. Schmidt claims unrestricted power to rule BIH as accountable to literally no one. He even maintains a strict ban against any court case in BIH that takes issue with his decision in any way. The
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay.
Gracias. Thank you very much, President. My first comment is that Uruguay wishes to restate its long-standing commitment with the multilateral human rights protection system and with the Human Rights Council. This is a body in which my country has had a very active role since its inception, and we are convinced that its role contributes to raise the bar when it comes to the standards for the promotion and protection of human rights. We express our concern at the repeated attacks against multilateral fora, and we believe that these are irreplaceable when it comes to their main role of facilitating dialogue and cooperation between states. The principle of cooperation of states with this council, with its mechanisms and special procedures, is key, and it is absolutely essential to ensure the efficiency or efficacy, the coherence, and the implementation of its mandate. We recognize the contribution made by civil society organizations in protecting human rights and their contribution to the work of the Council. We highlight the key role done by special procedures and independent experts. We see a scenario of regression when it comes to human rights, and we're also seeing actions to limit civic space and the exercise of rights and freedoms. It is difficult to defend the rights of women and those relating to sexual orientation and gender identity, freedoms of expression and of association. It is essential to critically reflect on current challenges posed by artificial intelligence and neurotechnologies. These must be a priority on our agenda. Uruguay reiterates its commitment to the promotion and protection of the rights of children and adolescents. And the speaker is interrupted.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to congratulate you and the Bureau on assuming this important role of the HRC presidency and assure you of my delegation's full support. The promotion and protection of human rights is fundamental to Kazakhstan's vision of democratic and a prosperous society, and we remain committed to upholding these values both at home and abroad. United by common ideals and values, our vibrant society finds itself in a markedly distinct state from where it was just 3, 2, or even 1 year ago. The government is implementing wide-ranging political reforms while the economy is undergoing structural and institutional transformations. Kazakhstan President Tokayev's reform agenda has irreversibly brought political democratization and a real social development. Results of these reforms were presented during the fourth Universal Periodic Review, demonstrating the Kazakhstan's continued commitment to fulfilling its human rights obligations and creating an enabling environment for the enjoyment of human rights by all. My country shared with this august body its achievements and the lessons learned on the path to strengthen democracy and building the just Kazakhstan. Mr. President, today the world is facing serious challenges due to unprecedented geopolitical contradictions and growing conflict potential. As a member of the Human Rights Council, Kazakhstan has contributed to collective efforts by promoting human rights and sharing its national experience and best practices in peace building, interethnic and interreligious tolerance, disarmament, gender equality, and child rights just last year. Following this work, Kazakhstan presented two important resolutions at the Human Rights Council on education for peace and tolerance and on the elimination of domestic violence. We are proud of our contributions to human rights, both nationally and globally, and reaffirm Kazakhstan's commitment to work with all stakeholders in order to uphold the principles enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Mr. President, 80 years ago today, the United Nations was created to promote peace, justice, and dignity for humankind. Multilateralism is not an option, it's a necessity. The system we have built serves as a foundation for the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms worldwide. It has been 3 years since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, with horrific consequences for the lives of Ukrainians, including on children. We stand with Ukraine as they fight to protect their sovereignty and underscore that any peaceful end to the conflict must include Ukraine at the negotiating table. Civilians have faced unbearable suffering in the Israel-Hamas conflict. We condemn Hamas's October 7th attacks and call for the release of all hostages and for sustained and enhanced humanitarian assistance in Gaza. All parties must ensure full implementation of the ceasefire and engage constructively in negotiating subsequent phases and bring a permanent end to hostilities. Monsieur le Président.
President, Canada continues to be concerned at the repression of ethnic and religious minorities by China and by evidence of transnational repression. We would ask China to cooperate with human rights mechanisms and to implement all recommendations made by the High Commissioner on Human Rights and the treaty bodies. We hope for a better future for the Syrian people and ask that accountability for human rights violations lie at the heart of efforts of transitional justice. We continue to closely monitor developments in Venezuela, Afghanistan, Iran, the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Nicaragua, where human rights are violated on an ongoing basis. And in Canada, we must do more to protect the human rights of Indigenous peoples and to combat against racism and systemic discrimination.
of Timor-Leste.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the promotion and protection of human rights are guiding principle and in the exercise of Timor-Leste's foreign policy. We believe that meaningful cooperation among state and relevant stakeholders is critical to achieving our common goals of ensuring the enjoyment of human rights for all. We recognize that women and girls worldwide continue to experience discrimination and violence, and Timor-Leste is fully committed to strengthening efforts and collaborating with all stakeholders to enhance their rights, protection, and opportunities. We will remain steadfast in our dedication to the global goal of leaving no one behind. Timor-Leste also places great importance on upholding freedom and expression of opinion. In this regard, we have enacted laws, developed policies, and implemented programs aimed at fostering an environment conducive to the full exercise of these freedoms. Mr. President, the world also yearns for a concerted effort to resolve long-standing conflict that continue to threaten regional and global peace. Stability in the region, such as Ukraine, Gaza, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, remain an urgent priority, as does the pursuit of a just, lasting solution to the Palestinian question, where an independent Palestinian homeland can coexist in peace and security alongside the state of Israel. Excellencies, taking advantage of this opportunity, I ask the Council to turn its attention to the situation of the people of Western Sahara. We regret the lack of progress and failure to hold the referendum that was promised to them. Timor-Leste reiterates its call for the people of Western Sahara to be granted the right to self-determination in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. It is our shared responsibility as free and sovereign nation to uphold and promote universal values, ensuring the freedom, justice, and human rights are respected to protect it for future generations. Over the 22 years, the restoration of independence, Timor-Leste has made remarkable strides in establishing a compulsory, universal, and free basic education system. Today, public school.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيد الرئيس.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, President, I commend you on your election at the head of this council and can assure you of the full support of my country for you and the members of the Bureau. Jordan promotes and protects human rights, and we represent a model to be followed when it comes to changing potential into reality. We protect our people and provide health, education, and independence mechanisms, and assure them of their duties and responsibilities pursuant to our constitution and legislation. We have set a clear path to broadening the participation of people in public and political affairs. And we have a view of the economy which is commensurate with the visions and expectations of our people. We have a roadmap for modernizing the public sector. And we are committed to reconstruction and progress. President, we work constructively with the Council and participate in thematic debates, and will be presenting ourselves our elections in October 2026 for the period 2027-29. This Council, since its inception, has overcome difficulties and has stood alongside the powerless and the weak, and we commend the Council for this role. However, there are serious conflicts in the world and rights violations, violations of sacred rights. We would remind the need to apply the law and call things by their names. Thank you. Thank you. We can now move on to the list of speakers from national human rights institutions and civil society representatives. And I give the floor to the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions.
Mr. President, in the summer of 1945, world leaders pledged to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war by working together in line with international law and universal human rights. Today, however, the very foundation of international law and multilateral cooperation are under severe pressure. The UN and other global institutions, including the ICJ and the ICC, created to safeguard peace and ensure accountability, are under attack. This erosion of institutional authority threatens the very framework of international justice. International law must be applied without exception by all nations and in all circumstances. Yet, we witness with growing concern the systematic violations of these legal principles, practices that undermine the credibility and effectiveness of our shared legal framework. And while some actors retreat from global engagement, we know that the complex, urgent, and interrelated challenges our world faces today cannot be addressed in isolation, but only through enhanced dialogue and cooperation. As national human rights institutions, we come together here today to issue an urgent call for leadership to uphold the universal principles of international law that bind us all together. We call for leadership to ensure international law is applied consistently, regardless of parties involved. We call for leadership to strengthen our international architecture for peace, security, and accountability. We call on leadership for peace, meaningful dialogue, and cooperation. Now is the time for global leadership, not only to safeguard our present, but to protect generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Liz Kelly as a civil society representative.
More than 140 million women give birth globally each year, with an additional estimated 35 million women also experiencing miscarriage and pregnancy loss. According to the World Health Organization, every woman has the right to respectful, dignified healthcare, including maternity care. Unfortunately, this is far from the reality for many women. Research shows that significant disparities exist in maternity care worldwide, and women often face neglect, abuse, and violence during childbirth, with women in regions affected by conflict, poverty, and poor healthcare infrastructure experiencing additional difficulties and hardships. Despite international recognition of women's rights to dignified healthcare, serious issues persist and are well documented. Unacceptably high maternal mortality rates, obstetric violence, and a lack of equitable access to respectful, evidence-based care are reported globally. Obstetric violence is recognized as a form of gender-based violence, and in 2019, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women published a report detailing the widespread abuse and mistreatment women experience during childbirth care. These human rights violations lead to profound trauma, and while the personal cost to women and their families are incalculable, several studies have estimated the economic costs, highlighting the broader impact on society. There is a vision for change. Maternity care must be woman-centred, consent-based and evidence-based. Women must be actively involved in the design, planning and evaluation of their services. Implementation of community-based midwifery-led care models should be implemented. The need for systemic change is urgent. Women and society need a commitment from policymakers at the highest levels to establish a human rights-based legal framework which enshrines the right to respectful care and ensures that all women, regardless of their location or circumstance, receive the quality care they are entitled.
Thank you. I give the floor to Sylvia Perret-Levin, as civil society representative.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, our human rights do not expire with age. However, older persons are discriminated against because of their age, facing daily ageism and human rights violations, including violence, abuse and neglect, lack of access to health care, decent work and social security. Last year, after considered discussion of substantial evidence over 14 sessions, the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Aging concluded its work. Recognizing that the international human rights system does not fully protect the rights of older persons, it recommended a new international legally binding instrument as a way to address the gaps. Civil society, including organizations of older persons around the world, welcomed this recommendation and the General Assembly's subsequent resolution 78/324 that urges relevant bodies of the UN to consider it. We urge the Human Rights Council to act on the General Assembly call and adopt at this session a resolution to establish an intergovernmental working group to draft an international legally binding instrument. We call on states to ensure that the negotiation and drafting process guarantees the full and meaningful participation of civil society, especially of older persons and their representative organizations. Governments have the legal obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill the human rights of all. Putting in place human rights standards that promote and protect the rights of older persons will ensure younger generations of today enjoy a future with dignity and rights. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Mohan Dangal, civil society representative by video.
Honorable Chair, distinguished delegates, today I stand before you to address a matter that is not just close to my heart, but foundational to human dignity, the right to education. This right is not just merely an aspiration, it is a fundamental human right enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Education is transformative, it empowers individuals, breaks the cycle of poverty, and builds equitable, resilient societies. Yet today, more than 251 million children and youths are still out of school globally, a figure which has not changed much since 2015. This education crisis, worsened by poverty, conflict, and systematic inequalities, denies millions their fundamental rights to education. Without education, children face heightened risk of exploitation, forced labor, and early child and forced marriage, perpetuating cycle of poverty, violence, and inequality. Education is not just about classrooms, it is about ensuring that every child, regardless of gender, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status, has access to quality and inclusive learning opportunities. I urge this Council to, number one, prioritize education in global development policies and funding to strengthen systems in unserved communities, including pre-primary, primary, and secondary education. Number two, support teacher training and curriculum development to foster inclusivity and critical thinking. Number three, champion innovative solutions using technology to bridge education gaps, especially in remote and disaster-prone areas. And finally, number four, hold governments accountable to fulfill their commitments to education under the international frameworks. This is a shared responsibility. Government, civil society, private agencies, and international bodies must work together to make education a universal right. As Nelson Mandela said, education is the powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Let us act with urgency and compassion to ensure no child is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Elena Bacchiero, also a civil society representative.
AI is no longer the future, it is our present. It is everywhere, shaping our workplaces, classrooms, healthcare, and even personal choices. As a young person growing up in the digital age, I stand here today with a sense of both hope and urgency. Hope for the immense possibilities AI holds and urgency because of the risks it presents. The potential of AI is undeniable. It can break down educational barriers, streamline healthcare delivery, and drive innovation to address global challenges. Yet, AI also poses a global challenge in itself. When built on biased data or without inclusivity, it reflects and amplifies our world's deepest inequities. Think about hiring systems that favor men over women, older candidates over younger ones, or prioritize certain languages, limiting education access, and predictive policing that unfairly target specific groups. These are not technical errors. These are systemic failures. These are human rights violations. The danger lies not only in the present, but in the future we are building. If we allow flawed AI systems to dictate opportunities and rights, we risk coding inequality into the fabric of our societies. We, young people, the generation that will inherit this world, refuse to accept a future dictated by biased algorithms and unchecked digital power. The time for action is now. The Human Rights Council must lead in ensuring AI is ethical, transparent, and accountable. We need enforceable guidelines prioritizing human rights, mandatory bias audits ensuring fairness, global cooperation, and standards that protect all people, not just those who already hold the power. Technology should be a tool for justice, not a weapon of inequality. The choices we make today will define our tomorrow. Let us choose wisely. Thank you.
Je vous remercie. Ceci nous a...
Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of the list of speakers for the general segment. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, it is my understanding that certain delegations have asked to exercise their right of reply, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lithuania. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lithuania would like to exercise its right of reply to Belarus statement during high-level segment. Belarusian dignitary claimed that Lithuania is prohibiting its citizens from traveling to Belarus, thus restricting their freedom of movement. Let me emphasize that according to the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Belarus, I quote, "Some of the violations committed in Belarus may amount to crimes against humanity, specifically imprisonment and persecution on political grounds, in that they were committed intentionally as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against a segment of the civilian population with knowledge of the attack." End of quote. In this regard, Lithuania warns its citizens not to travel to Belarus, where they may face serious human rights violations. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of India. You also have 3 minutes.
Mr. President, India is exercising its right of reply in response to the baseless and malicious references made by Pakistan. It is regrettable, yet unsurprising, to see Pakistan's so-called leaders and delegates continuing to dutifully spread falsehoods handed down by its military terrorist complex. Pakistan is even making a mockery of the OIC by abusing it as its mouthpiece, which is fooling nobody. We do not wish to dignify such propaganda, but are constrained to make a few simple points for the record. First, the Union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh were, are, and will always remain an integral and inalienable part of India. Second, the unprecedented political, social, and economic progress in Jammu and Kashmir in the past few years speaks for itself. These successes are a testament to the people's trust in the government's commitment to bring normalcy to a region scarred by decades of Pakistan-sponsored cross-border terrorism. Third, as a country where human rights abuses, persecution of minorities, and systematic erosion of democratic values constitute state policies, and which brazenly harbors UN-sanctioned terrorists, Pakistan is in no position to lecture anyone. Instead of its unhealthy obsession with India, Pakistan should focus on providing actual governance and justice to its own people. Mr. President, it is unfortunate that this Council's time continues to be wasted by a failed state, which thrives on instability and survives on international handouts. Its rhetoric reeks of hypocrisy, its actions of inhumanity, and its governance of incompetence. India remains focused on democracy, progress, and ensuring dignity for its people, values that Pakistan would do well to learn from. I thank you.
Dear colleagues, I call on all speakers to abide by language that is compliant with UN terminology and also suited to the serene nature of our council and its work. Thank you for respecting those rules.
Of Armenia, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. We take the floor in order to exercise our right of reply to the statement delivered by the Deputy Foreign Minister of Azerbaijan. I do not deem it necessary to touch upon all points he mentioned concerning my country, as the statement of the Foreign Minister of Armenia has already presented in comprehensive manner all the facts regarding the situation in our region. I would like to reiterate that the Constitution of the Republic of Armenia does not contain any territorial claims against Azerbaijan. The Constitutional Court of the Republic of Armenia, in its decision dated September 26, 2024, noted that the reference to the Declaration of Independence in the preambular part of the Constitution, which according to Azerbaijan is containing claims against the territory, pertains exclusively to those provisions of the declarations that have been enshrined in the articles of Armenian Constitution. No article of our Constitution contains any direct or indirect references to Nagorno-Karabakh. Meantime, the preambular part of Azerbaijan's constitution makes a reference to the Constitutional Act adopted on October 18, 1991. This Constitutional Act, in its turn, makes a reference to the Declaration of Independence of the First Republic of Azerbaijan, adopted on May 28, 1918. In November 1919, Azerbaijan submitted its administrative territorial map to the Entente, according to which the several regions of the Republic of Armenia, amounting approximately 60% of our territory, are included in the territory of Azerbaijan. Thus, Azerbaijan's constitution contains territorial claims against Armenia. The Republic of Armenia does not raise the issue of amending Azerbaijan's constitution for two reasons. First, such a demand would lead to a deadlock in the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace process. And second, there is a provision in the agreed part of the peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan stating that none of the parties may invoke internal legislation as justification for its failure to implement this agreement. Another article in the agreed part of the peace treaty states that the parties recognize each other's territorial integrity, have no territorial claims against each other, and oblige not to raise such claims in the future. In this context, I would like to touch upon also the issue of the so-called Western Azerbaijan narrative. It is obvious that official Baku, with this narrative, wants to materialize its territorial demands against the Republic of Armenia, which, as I have mentioned above, is recorded in Azerbaijan's constitution. If that's not the case...
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Mr. President, we categorically reject all the baseless allegations against Turkey. Regretfully, disinformation of the international community is still continued by portraying the Cyprus problem as one of occupation. It is crucial to underline that none of the United Nations Security Council resolutions on Cyprus describes the legitimate and justified Turkish presence on the island in line with the 1959 International Cyprus Treaties as occupation. The only occupation in Cyprus is the occupation by the Greek Cypriots of the seat of the government of the 1960 Republic of Cyprus. Mr. President, the Cyprus problem started in 1963, not in 1974, when the Greek Cypriot side forcibly usurped the title of the 1960 Partnership Republic of Cyprus and expelled the Turkish Cypriot partner from all state organs through force of arms. Guarantor Turkey was compelled to intervene in 1974 in accordance with her rights and obligations under the Treaty of Guarantee after 11 years of Turkish Cypriot suffering at the hands of the Greek Cypriot militia. I would like to remind that the presence of the Turkish peace forces prevents the recurrence of violence on the island. For the Turkish Cypriot side, the tragedy of missing persons dates back to 1963, long before the Greek Cypriot side. The Turkish Cypriot side does its utmost on this humanitarian issue affecting both sides. Over the past 5 decades and numerous rounds of United Nations facilitated negotiations, efforts aimed at reaching an agreement under a federation based on the political equality of the two sides have failed, despite the continuous goodwill and constructive approach by the Turkish Cypriot side. In the light of this reality, the exhausted federation model cannot any longer consume the resources as well as the time of the international community, and the only way to reach a sustainable agreement on the island is through acceptance of the fact that two states exist on the island today and that these two states have sovereign equality and equal international status. Year 2025 is yet another year when the Turkish Cypriot people are still subjected to human rights violations, unjust restrictions, and are being denied of their rightful representation and participation in international fora. We are calling upon the international community to reaffirm the sovereign equality and equal international status of the Turkish Cypriot people so that they can take their rightful place on international platform. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cyprus.
Thank you, Mr. President. Cyprus would like to exercise its right of reply in response to the statement made by the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey during the high-level segment of the 58th session of this Council. Turkey's continued occupation of the northern part of Cyprus since its illegal invasion in 1974 remains a flagrant violation of international law, relevant Security Council resolutions, and binding international agreements. This occupation infringes upon the human rights of all Cypriots, both Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. The illegality of such aggression was manifested by the Security Council resolutions 541 of 1983 and 550 of 1984. The European Court of Human Rights additionally confirmed that through the presence of 34,000 troops, Turkey exercises effective control over the northern part of Cyprus, occupying 36.3% of the Republic's territory. The occupation has resulted in the forced displacement of thousands of Cypriots, and the usurpation of their properties. One of the most tragic consequences of the Turkish invasion is the missing persons. At the same time, Turkey has pursued a systematic policy of colonizing the occupied areas by facilitating the influx of settlers with the aim of altering the island's demographic character and cultural heritage. Turkey's control extends beyond military presence, encompassing direct political influence, economic dependency, and demographic manipulation through the settlement policy. The notion of the so-called isolation of the Turkish Cypriot community is a direct consequence of Turkey's actions. The ongoing division of Cyprus stems directly from Turkey's military occupation and the unilateral declaration of the so-called TRNC. The Turkish assertions constitute a propaganda plot to divert attention from its responsibility for the violations in occupied Cyprus. Turkey's claims on behalf of the Turkish Cypriots have repeatedly been rejected by the international community and competent judicial bodies. We firmly reject any attempt by Turkey to evade its responsibility for the ongoing occupation. My government remains steadfast in its efforts to reunify our country for the benefit of all Cypriots. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
Mr. President, Britain, the Czech Republic, Finland, Lithuania, Japan, Australia, Canada abused the high-level platform of the Council, smearing and slandering China for no reason. China firmly opposes and fully rejects it. The countries concerned continue to fabricate and spread lies and rumors, regard human rights as a tool to attack others and serve themselves. They engage in double standards and provoke bloc confrontation in the Council, which seriously violates the principles of objectivity, impartiality, non-selectivity, and non-proliferation. Such behavior is unpopular, and the plots are doomed to failure. China puts people first, regards safeguarding people's interests at the starting point and the end result of human rights. We insist that all ethnic groups enjoy human rights equally and promote the leapfrog development of human rights in China. At present, Xinjiang, Tibet, and other regions enjoy economic development and social stability. The rights of people of all ethnic groups are fully guaranteed, such as the freedom of religious belief, freedom to use and develop their own spoken and written languages, and to inherit cultural heritages. Since the implementation of the Hong Kong National Security Law and the National Security Ordinance, Hong Kong society has returned to stability, and the lawful rights of residents have effectively been guaranteed. Britain, the Czech Republic, Japan, Australia, and other countries claim to be so-called defenders of human rights, but in fact, they are out and right human rights violators. If you sincerely promote and protect human rights, you should take tangible actions to combat domestic human rights violations such as serious racism, xenophobia, and gender discrimination, and effectively protect the rights of minorities and vulnerable groups such as Muslims, women, and children. China advises you to work earnestly for the human rights of your own people and the people of the world. Stop politicizing, instrumentalizing, and weaponizing human rights, and refrain from interfering in other countries' internal affairs under the pretext of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation exercises this right of reply to answer some allegations raised yesterday and today against my country. On the issue of women's rights in Iran, we expect those so worried countries like Sweden to be considerate and cognizant of the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures on the economic rights and financial prosperity of Iranian people, mainly women and girls. The claimants of human rights cannot play as human rights advocate while ignoring the main causes of the problems. We also invite those who expressed concern on falsely claimed violations on Iran to pay attention to the very proved, documented, and continuous breach of human rights of more than 60,000 Palestinian people, mainly women and children, by occupying Israel. Lack of action in this regard has made the perpetrator more savage, demanding, and exuberant. Misleading the Human Rights Council by emboldening non-important issues and turning blind eye on gross violations will give the real criminal more chance for realizing their evil intentions on the cost of human rights. Mr. President, what listed by Sweden, Canada, Albania, Liechtenstein, and some others were a clear example of the selectivity in Human Rights Council. This politicization of human rights and application of the double standards by such countries will more injure our already wounded common values and principles, will more damage credibility of Human Rights Council and UN, and will more tarnish global trust on the human rights machinery. We invite such countries to first pay attention to the human rights situation in their own countries that in some cases are troubling, and then prevent further politicization of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The DPRK delegation would like to exercise its right of reply to the allegations of some European EU countries, Japan and ROK. Their nonsensical allegations on the DPRK are arrogant and politically motivated for despicable purposes. Therefore, we categorically reject. It is an act of following the US hostile policy towards the DPRK and has nothing to do with the genuine human rights. They should, above all, handle the human rights abuses in their countries rather than naming others. We deplore the brazen attempt by ROK to use this forum as a confrontational platform against the DPRK for its despicable purposes. The allegations by ROK have no connection with promotion and protection of genuine human rights. Its remarks are full of fabrications and distortions aimed for the political and military confrontation and plot against the DPRK. ROK continues to disregard the demands of the international community to remedy systematic and widespread violations and abuses of human rights. That is maintaining of national security law and other evil laws contrary to the international human rights laws. That is repression of democratic entities and individuals, the trade unions and mass media. That is increasing practice of social evil such as human trafficking for sexual exploitation and forced labor at home, as well as abduction of DPRK citizens abroad. The world's top suicide kingdom is none other than the ROK. We strongly urge ROK to take concrete steps to end its all sorts of human rights abuses, including those committed by outside forces, rather than playing as a servant of the United States. As attested by history, Japan is the war criminal state on worst record, which includes forcibly drafting more than 8.4 million Koreans, massacring over 1 million, and forcing 200,000 Korean women into sexual slaves for Imperial Japanese Army. We strongly urge Japan to take concrete measures to hold state responsibility through poignant remorse, sincere apology, and legal reparations for heinous crimes against humanity, rather than touting so-called abduction issue that had already been settled irreversibly and completely through our sincerity and efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Azerbaijan.
Mr. President, we exercise our right of reply to the statement by Armenia. Firstly, we remain concerned about the territorial claims to the Karabakh region, voiced in the statement of Armenia, which referred to the sovereign territories of Azerbaijan under a fake name. Secondly, Azerbaijan has taken concrete steps to investigate and prosecute mass atrocities and other offenses committed by Armenia during its aggression in the early 1990s, and the subsequent occupation of the territories of Azerbaijan for almost 30 years. The denial and ignorance of serious violations, coupled with attempts to discredit and thereby obstruct justice through disinformation and smear campaigns, including in international bodies, constitute a clear contempt for international law and the rule of law. Today, as we commemorate the 33rd anniversary of the Khojaly genocide, we once again underline that accountability and redress are essential to ensure the rights of the victims and for post-conflict normalization and reconciliation. Thirdly, we reject deliberate misinterpretation of the legitimate demands of the Western Azerbaijan community to return to their ancestral lands in Armenia as a territorial claim by Azerbaijan. Despite repeated calls by the expelled Azerbaijanis to launch a genuine dialogue and ensure a safe and dignified return to their homeland, the government of Armenia persistently denies them exercising this fundamental right. We expect the High Commissioner and the relevant UN mechanisms to address the rights of hundreds of thousands of Azerbaijanis once expelled from their homes in Armenia. Finally, Azerbaijan has fully restored its territorial integrity and sovereignty and has been promoting a peace agenda in the region. Despite the wounds of the aggression, Azerbaijan offered Armenia peace on equal terms, fully in line with norms and principles of international law on the basis of mutual recognition of and respect for each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Over the past year, Azerbaijan and Armenia have registered significant progress in the normalization process. Azerbaijan will continue to take this process forward, acting with a strong sense of responsibility for not only its national security and well-being, but also for a better future for the entire region. Our commitment and determination to bring this process to its logical conclusion remain intact. We expect Armenia to eliminate the key barrier in the normalization process, which is to legally abandon territorial claims against Azerbaijan through the constitutional amendments. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Mr. President, truth is inconvenient for some, and when facts beget truth, they become inconvenient as well. This delegation must realize that prevarications will not change the facts on ground, especially those established by the UN Security Council. The fact is that Jammu and Kashmir never was and never will be the so-called integral part of India. The fact is that India is an illegally occupying territory of the disputed territory. Time and again, this delegation resorts to the same tactics of deflecting global attention away from its violations and abuses committed in the occupied Jammu and Kashmir. While the reality remains that the Indian occupation forces are unabashedly resorting to massive human rights violations in the territory. Time and again, several UN mandate holders have raised alarm on the state of human rights in the occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Many of these experts have raised specific objections to the draconian laws being applied in the occupied territory, giving occupation forces powers that are not only inconsistent with international human rights law, but are an anathema to it. Mr. President, the continual denial of the Kashmiris' right to self-determination is a long-standing violation of the UN Charter, UNSC resolutions, and the international law. Every human right of the occupied Kashmiris has been violated during this 7 decades-long inglorious history of the illegal occupation. If India wants to contest these facts, the first stage should be to provide access to IACHR, international media, and independent observers to the occupied territory and allow them to determine facts on the ground. Lastly, Mr. President, silencing criticism is always convenient when facing the truth is inconvenient. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation would like to exercise the right of reply to the statement made by North Korea in this session. It is regrettable that unfounded statements have been made regarding history. Any nation in the region should be humble about its own history and must take it seriously. Japan has been diligently maintaining this stance, and Japan's progress as a peaceful nation after the war is a testament to this. Japan has consistently respected democracy and human rights and contributed to peace and prosperity in the Asia-Pacific region and the international community for 80 years since the end of World War II. Referring to comfort women as sexual slavery does not reflect the facts, and therefore this expression should not be used. The claim and figures that North Korea mentioned regarding Japan are groundless and based on factual errors. The claims there is no time to lose before we resolve the abduction issue. Japan strongly urges North Korea to return all the abductees to their homes immediately. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation would like to exercise the right of reply these baseless accusations against my government. The DPRK should heed the voices of the international community, which continue to raise serious concerns over the systematic, grave, and widespread human rights violations, including crimes against humanity committed in North Korea. When it comes to the North Korean defectors mentioned by the DPRK delegation in its statement, they decided to come to the Republic of Korea of their own free will. They have settled down in the Republic of Korea and are currently living in the country as ordinary citizens. Meanwhile, the issues of abductees, detainees, and unrepatriated prisoners of war have persisted for 4 decades. We urge the DPRK to immediately verify their whereabouts and return them to their families. According to our relevant laws, the number of wartime abductees officially recognized stands at 4,777, while there are 516 post-war abductees. Additionally, testimonies from repatriated POWs indicated that hundreds of South Korean POWs remain unreturned. Furthermore, 6 of our nationals are still being held in North Korea. In particular, 3 missionaries, Kim Jong-wook, Kim Guk-gi, and Choi Chung-gil, whom my Vice Minister mentioned in her statement yesterday, have been detained for over a decade. Mr. President, we'd like to reaffirm that the Korean government, under its commitment to human rights as a universal value, remains fully committed to supporting and actively contributing to the UN and international efforts to improve the human rights situation in North Korea. The Korean government will continue to pursue multidimensional efforts to promote human rights of our fellow North Koreans. I thank you.
Thank you. I understand that the distinguished representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has asked to exercise his right, a second right of reply. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation would like to exercise its second right of reply to the allegations by Japan and ROK. In the history of World War, Japan is an only criminal state that horribly violated the dignity and fundamental rights of hundreds of thousands of women, including teenage girls, to the battlefields as sexual slaves. There is only one country in the world which organized and managed the sexual slavery system by means of state power, and has persistently denied such crimes against humanity without any investigation and punishment for over 80 years. It is none other than Japan. Japan can never evade its historical and legal moral responsibility for its crimes by whatsoever. ROK continues to disregard the demands of the international community to remedy systematic and widespread violations and abuses of human rights. It's ridiculous that ROK, that has never been able to protest all the humiliations and human rights abuses imposed on her people by the US military, the occupying force over the past half-century, dares to talk about somebody's fabricated human rights issues. We urge ROK to focus intensively on strong remedial action of its dire human rights plight as per recommendations by the international community. For us, the sophism of ROK against the DPRK can only be heard as the size of those who are cornered by the inferiority in all areas of political and social life. Thank you.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation would like to exercise the second right to reply to the statement made by North Korea. My delegation will not repeat here what we already said, but we have to say again that the claims and figures that North Korea mentioned regarding Japan are groundless and based on the factual errors. Having humbly accepted the facts of history, Japan has sincerely addressed various issues for almost 80 years since the end of World War II. In this way, Japan has been actively contributing to international peace and security. Again, referring to comfort women, word sexual slavery does not reflect the facts, and therefore this expression should not be used. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is regrettable that we are compelled to exercise a second right of reply to the statements of the North Korean delegation. I will not repeat the points already made in my previous statement. In June last year, the UN Security Council, with overwhelming support from its members, convened a meeting on the DPRK's human rights situation, highlighting how the DPRK regime has sacrificed the welfare of its people to sustain in its illegal nuclear and missile development. We are particularly concerned that the DPRK funds its illegal weapons programs through severe human rights violations, including forced labor. Furthermore, the deepening military cooperation between Russia and the DPRK has once again underscored the strong linkage between the DPRK's human rights violations and international peace and security. Testimonies from captured North Korean soldiers reveal that they are deployed to the battlefield without knowledge of their actual combat environment and are indoctrinated to commit suicide rather than be captured, depriving them of their vital life. Ultimately, such deployments rooted in human rights abuses only perpetuate a vicious cycle of nuclear and missile development. Mr. President, during the fourth cycle of the UPR on the DPRK in November last year, numerous states voiced serious concerns over the country's human rights violations. We strongly urge the DPRK to take these recommendations seriously and implement concrete measures to address them. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Armenia.
President, we feel compelled to take the floor for the second time in order to reject attempts to distort the facts and evade responsibilities by Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan's state-sponsored policy of Armenophobia and ethnic hatred is documented by UN-sanctioned, which has raised alarm over Azerbaijan's failure to combat deep-rooted anti-Armenian sentiment at the highest level of the government. The ICJ, in its provisional order of December 7, 2021, ordered Azerbaijan to take all necessary measures to prevent and punish acts of racial hatred and violence against Armenians. Yet today, this harmful ideology continues and has even reached an alarming levels, as evidenced by the recent statements of President Ilham Aliyev. In his recent bellicose, the President of Azerbaijan referred to Armenia as a fascist state formed by the proponents of fascist ideology, which must be eradicated either by the Armenian leadership, will destroy it, or we will. We have no other choice. These statements of Azerbaijan are being increasingly echoed in so-called Western Azerbaijan narrative, which is sponsored by the top leadership of Azerbaijan, implying to 60% of the sovereign territory of the Republic of Armenia, which is referred to as territory presently under the control of the political and legal unit called Republic of Armenia. If combined with Azerbaijan's multi-million-dollar procurement of weapons, this rhetoric reveals a growing and deliberate threat emanating from Azerbaijan against Armenia. Azerbaijan's state policy of hatred against Armenia is manifested also in systematic destruction of Armenian cultural heritage in Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenian churches, monasteries, cemeteries, and historical landmarks are being destroyed and razed or misrepresented to eradicate their identity. The ASEAN on cultural rights called it cultural
Excellence, chers collègues.
Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, given that it is always necessary to remind speakers that they have to use language which is commensurate with the inherent dignity which is proper for a dialogue on human rights. I very much hope for your cooperation to make sure that our discussion can be conducted with the respect that it merits. Everyone can express their point of view, but it must remain or be spoken in a respectful way. Tolerance must be one of the hallmarks of this Human Rights Council. It is with this in mind that if there are no further requests for the floor, I will now close the high-level segment and the general segment of the 58th session of this council. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, before we continue, we need to tackle issues relating to procedure and the organization of the meeting. I wish to remind you that during the organizational meeting of the 3rd of February, we considered the program of work of the 58th session of the Human Rights Council, and a revised version of the program of work dating 25 February was circulated yesterday. I'm convinced that the program of work can be approved unamended because it is an evolving document and that changes can be made throughout this session. If I see no objection, I declare that the program of work of the 58th session of the Human Rights Council stands adopted. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, allow me to remind you that the online registration system for the speakers list for interactive dialogues, the general debates and the interactive dialogues opened on the 17th of February. The speakers list will be closed about 15 minutes after the beginning of each debate, dialogue or interactive dialogue. The online registration on the speakers list for the adoption of the outcome documents of the UPR will be open from Monday 10 March at 9 a.m. to Thursday 13 March at 6 p.m. and no registration will be possible after this date. Speaking times or modalities for determining speaking times will be the same as the recent sessions, and speakers lists will be available on the extranet of the Council and will be regularly updated for each debate. Allow me to remind you that the deadline or limit for the submission of draft resolutions has been set at Friday, 21st of March at 1 p.m. It is only in exceptional circumstances that the Council will be able to extend this deadline by a maximum of 24 hours. And I seize this opportunity to remind you that the late submission of drafts resolutions, as well as the high number of oral and written revisions or amendments will complicate the task of many delegations, and late submission of drafts will prevent the Secretariat and make it difficult for conference services to ensure the translation of texts in all languages and will make it difficult to produce program budget implications. Let me also remind you that in order to facilitate the work and the performance of interpreters, delegations are requested to provide a copy of their statements in advance by uploading them on the online system and by providing a paper copy to conference services. And finally, delegations are asked to upload an electronic or digital version of their statements via the online registration system for the speakers list so that they can be posted on the extranet of the Council. It's essential to upload these speeches in Word format in order to improve access to Council proceedings for persons with disabilities. And those that are uploaded in a non-accessible format will not be posted on the extranet. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I wish to emphasize that the United Nations, including this Council, have zero tolerance for any form of harassment, including sexual harassment. All complaints will swiftly be dealt with, and we would encourage the reporting of any incident directly to a United Nations security official. Your Excellency, distinguished colleagues, we are awaiting the High Commissioner so that he can present his report on the occupied the Palestinian territories, and we will therefore reconvene at 5 p.m. And I ask your forbearance for this short delay.
Excellence.
Excellencies, colleagues. I now declare open Agenda Item 2, entitled the Annual Report by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and reports of the High Commissioner and the Secretary General. We will now begin the interactive dialogue on the report by the High Commissioner on the situation of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem, in accordance with Resolution 55/28. I have the pleasure of welcoming Mr. Volker Türk, High Commissioner for Human Rights, to introduce his report. The list of speakers will be closed in 15 minutes. High Commissioner, you have the floor. Thank you, President.
We are at an inflection point in the crisis in the occupied Palestinian territory. A fragile ceasefire is allowing the people of Gaza to breathe, Israeli hostages and Palestinian detainees to be released, and life-saving humanitarian aid to be delivered. At this tenuous moment, the world must ask itself how to resolve this decades-old conflict and stop the cycle of violence. Any plans for a better future must deal with the past, so accountability and justice for violations are crucial. For more than 57 years, people in Gaza and in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, have been suffocating under Israeli occupation. They have been denied their most basic human rights, from the right to self-determination, to freedom of movement, to an adequate standard of living. In Gaza, they have been subjected to blockades amounting to collective punishment. In the West Bank, illegal settlements and violence have been growing for decades, in violation of international law, with a significant increase over the past 3 years. Most of these violations have gone unpunished. There's absolutely no justification for the horrific attacks committed on 7 October 2023, when Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups brutally assaulted Israeli communities, killed civilians, and took more than 250 hostages, and I have repeatedly condemned these acts. And nothing justifies the appalling manner in which Israel has conducted its military operations in Gaza, which consistently breached fundamental principles of international humanitarian law. According to the Gaza Ministry of Health, more than 48,000 people, most of whom are women and children, have been killed. Over 35,000 children have lost one or both parents. More than 1,054 medical personnel have been killed, with many others injured or detained by Israeli forces. At least 277 United Nations staff have been killed, as well as a reported 200 journalists and media workers. Over 2/3 of essential infrastructure is destroyed or damaged. The level of devastation to basic features of civilian life across Gaza is massive, from homes to hospitals to schools to the justice system. Restrictions imposed by Israel, despite its obligations as occupying power, have created a humanitarian catastrophe. And an estimated 90% of the population has been displaced, often multiple times. In the West Bank, Israel has ramped up its use of unnecessary and disproportionate force against Palestinians, has destroyed refugee camps, severely restricted movement, and displaced tens of thousands of people. In the northern West Bank, many are now in need of urgent humanitarian assistance. Torture and ill treatment of detainees has been a continuing and appalling feature on all sides. The severe crackdown on civic space, affecting in particular those working on human rights and humanitarian issues through threats, intimidation, and other measures, is alarming. Behind each awful statistic is a life lost, torn apart, or shattered. We cannot yet grasp the full extent of this tragedy, nor the many years of trauma, grief, and mourning that lie ahead. Mr. President, the report before you today take stock of the raft of international human rights violations in the occupied Palestinian territory and the absence of meaningful accountability for them. There has been an unprecedented disregard for the principles of international humanitarian law in the conduct of hostilities in Gaza and Israel since October 2023. As just detailed, and as my office and others have documented, Israel's means and methods of warfare have caused staggering levels of casualties and destruction, raising concerns over the commission of war crimes and other possible atrocity crimes. There has been a limited number of investigations and indictments by the Israeli authorities, for example, for abuse of detainees. However, there are serious doubts about the capacity and will of the Israeli justice system to deliver full accountability in line with international standards, notably in relation to the unlawful killing of Palestinians in Gaza or in the West Bank. Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups have taken, held, and tortured hostages in Gaza and here have indiscriminately fired projectiles into Israeli territory, amounting to war crimes. There are grave concerns that they may have committed other serious breaches of international humanitarian law in Gaza, including the intentional co-location of military objectives and Palestinian civilians. My office is unaware of any measures taken by Hamas and other Palestinian groups to punish those responsible for all violations. Mr. President, any attempts at shaping a peaceful future where such horrors do not recur must ensure that perpetrators are held to account. The tragic record of this conflict and of so many other conflicts shows clearly how impunity begets more violence. Abuse is given free rein to ripple across other war zones. This harms us all and generations down the line. Delegitimizing and threatening international institutions that are there to serve people and uphold international law also harms us all. It is clear that all these violations and abuses need to be investigated independently. Excellencies, we urgently need an end to the conflict, the unconditional release, freeing of all hostages, the release of arbitrarily held detainees, and an end as rapidly as possible to Israel's unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory as affirmed by the International Court of Justice. The ceasefire must hold. Each phase must be implemented by both sides in good faith and in full. And all of us must do everything in our power to build on it, to create a path to a sustainable peace so that Palestinians and Israelis can live side by side in equal dignity and rights. And it should be for the Palestinian people to determine their own future. We must resist any normalization of conduct, including proposals for annexation or forced transfer, which could threaten the peace and security of Palestinians and Israelis and of the wider region. This is the moment for voices of reason to prevail, for solutions that will deliver justice and make space for compassion, healing, and truth-telling. This begins by seeing the pain and suffering of the other, and we have seen, unfortunately, so much dehumanizing rhetoric, including by political leaders. Defending and maintaining the international edifice of human rights and the law is everyone's responsibility. The alternative is unthinkable for Israelis, Palestinians, and for our common humanity. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. In accordance with our practice, we will now begin by hearing the delegations of the countries concerned. I see that the delegation of Israel is not in the room, so I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine. You have 5 minutes. Microphone.
Thank you, President. At the outset, I wish to thank the High Commissioner and his office for the report and for the valuable presentation of it to the Council. We should, however, reiterate that it has not been balanced in dealing with the facts, because it deals with Israeli settler occupation and colonial occupation with the Palestinian state, which lives under it on equal footing, ignoring that it's illegal. The occupation of practices apartheid in line with legal and UN reports. The report outlines some of the grave violations committed by the occupation forces up until 24 October. But the situation on the ground is more atrocious since 77 October. Until now, the occupation force committed war crimes and genocide against the Palestinians, leading to the killing of thousands of Palestinians, including 15,000 children and 12,000 women. The occupation forces targeted the medical crews and journalists, killing 186 medics and more journalists, together with 203 UN staff. More than 11,200 Palestinians unaccounted for under debris of demolished houses, and over 9,000 Palestinians are behind bars under occupation, facing violations including torture, misuse, and medical neglect. President, in spite of the ceasefire in 18 February of this year, Israel was not committed to it from the first day. Occupation forces killed 132 Palestinians during the truce and injured 900 in immediate target of civilians returning to their homes and who want to remove the debris. However, we see some sides lately calling for the displacement of Gazans and refusing their return, which is in grave violation against humanity and a war crime in line with Roma Pact. The occupying power uses hunger as a weapon of war, ignoring the ICJ orders, which compels it to allow entry of humanitarian aid. 2/3 of needed trucks have been allowed in, and tents have been denied, together with mobile homes, in spite of the need to have them, in addition of a denial of entry of heavy equipment to remove debris. It has impeded access of food, medics, and slowing the work of hospitals, which has been destroyed by Israeli shelling. President, the occupying power forces and the settlers have escalated their terror campaign in the West Bank through executions, collective detention, demolition of houses, and methodic ethnic cleansing in Jenin, Nablus, Tulkarm, and Topaz, and other cities and villages and refugee camps in Palestine. This led to displacement of over 40,000 Palestinians. Demolition activities of infrastructure and houses is ongoing and unabated in the West Bank. The Minister of the Occupation Army said it bluntly that, and I quote, people will not return to the north of West Bank camps, and that they have stopped the work of UNRWA, which is an avowal of methodic policies of displacement. The aim is to put an end to UNRWA, and in order to put an end to Palestinian refugees, putting an end to the right of return. President, wars have rules, as Secretary General said. However, the illegal occupation power committed all types of crimes, including genocides, hunger prevented, water, electricity, and medicine denied access of assistance, transfer of the sick. It targeted hospitals, places of worship, and schools. All of these are violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law and Roma Pact. This means that legal international institutions should shoulder their responsibilities in order to provide protection to our people and to hold the perpetrators and killers to account. We welcome arrest warrants against Netanyahu and his Minister of Defense. The President interrupts the speaker.
Thank you very much. I now open the floor for questions and comments on the report. The speaking time is 1 minute and 30 seconds. The speaking list is now closed, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan on behalf of the group of Arab states.
In the name of Allah, the most gracious, most graceful, our group took note of the report and wished to express its concerns vis-à-vis its chronicling of events. It showed that there is a correspondence between Israel and the Palestinians and occupation. This is a fact denied by the report, despite that it has mentioned the ICG's advisory opinion. Palestinians are under occupation, and the genocide cannot be described as mere escalation without recognizing decades of siege and settlement. We condemn Israel's non-cooperation with the IACHR and call upon the international community to pressure Israel to allow the Commission of Inquiry to conduct its mandate in investigating violations of international law. In closing, our group stresses the need to combat impunity and call upon the international community and parties to Geneva 4 to shoulder their responsibilities and take all necessary measures to ensure accountability, provide redress, and ensure Palestinians access to their rights and end to the Israeli illegal occupation. And thank you, President.
The floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait on behalf of the Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Gulf.
Thank you, President. Our countries took note of the report on the situation of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territories. We condemn the escalation of violations against the Palestinians by the occupying power. This occupying power, which violates international law and principles of human rights in Gaza Strip. We have seen the most heinous crimes against civilians over a year and a half. This included denying entry of assistance, destroying facilities, and ending the work of UNRWA. In this light, we applaud the efforts by Egypt and Qatar and the US in order to reach a ceasefire and exchange of prisoners, and we call for entry of assistance without impediment in order to reach a permanent ceasefire. In the West Bank, the occupation conducts large-scale attacks and conducts a collective punishment with disregard of the death of civilians and in violation of international law. In closing, we see that the two-state solution ensures stability and peace and call for doubling diplomatic efforts to find a comprehensive and just law that guarantees the rights of Palestinians to have their own independent state in 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. And thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union. Microphone, please.
Thank you, President. We reiterate our support to your mandate. We support your call to pursue independent investigation, accountability and justice for any grave violations and abuses as stated in your report, High Commissioner. The EU has warmly welcomed the ceasefire agreement in Gaza. It is vital that the deal is fully implemented. The EU recalls the need to fully implement the ICJ orders, which are legally binding. While welcoming the increase of aid entering Gaza since the ceasefire, the EU reiterates its calls for access to humanitarian aid and that aid can be effectively distributed, including by UN agencies and notably UNRWA. The EU reiterates its condemnation in the strongest term of the terrorist attacks conducted by Hamas against Israel on 7th October. In exercising its right to defend itself, Israel must fully comply with its obligation under international law. The EU strongly condemns the further escalation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The EU reiterates its call on Israel to cooperate fully with the UN, including human rights mechanisms. The EU will remain committed to a comprehensive, just and lasting peace based on the two-state solution. The EU underlines the vital role of civil society and hopes that cooperation with civil society will remain unhampered. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ghana on behalf of the Group of African States.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the African Group. The full version will be posted on the extranet. The African Group extends its appreciation to the High Commissioner for this report. The group remains deeply concerned about the persistent lack of accountability for the violations committed against the Palestinian people and its exacerbation in light of the unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe caused by brutal Israeli aggression in Gaza, as well as escalation of violations committed by Israeli forces in the West Bank. Stemming from its common values and principles that stand strongly against colonialism, oppression, and apartheid, the African Group reaffirms the centrality of the just cause of Palestinians and steadfastness of its support to the historic struggle of the Palestinian people to realize their rights to self-determination and establish their independent state based on the 4th of June 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. The African Group calls on Israel to fully comply with the provisional order issued by the International Court of Justice and reiterates its unflinching support for relevant UJA resolutions on Palestine and declared positions of the UN Secretary General on the ongoing atrocities committed in Gaza, despite the recently assigned ceasefire agreement, which can inevitably lead to serious repercussions on the state of peace and security in the Middle East. The African Group underscores the necessity of resolving the Palestinian...
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation.
Thank you, Mr. President. The OIC Group thanks the High Commissioner for the presentation and takes note of the report prepared by his office. We have just heard from the state of Palestine and stand with the Palestinian people in complete solidarity and unwavering support. Events before, during, and after the reporting period have laid bare the illegal occupying power's utter disregard for its human rights and humanitarian obligations. Attempts to strike a balance can only favor the occupying power. We must therefore guard against false equivalence between the occupying power and those under its illegal occupation. The OIC Group condemns in the strongest terms Israel's horrific and shocking crimes in the Gaza Strip in the context of the crime of genocide. We categorically reject the forced displacement of Palestinian citizens inside or outside their land and call for the withdrawal of occupation forces from the entirety of Gaza. Mr. President, no pretext can ever justify what the Palestinian people have suffered and continue to suffer in Gaza, East Jerusalem, or the West Bank. No category of protections has been left unviolated. The OIC Group calls for credible steps to prevent the obliteration of evidence and to hold the perpetrators accountable. We also call for immediate and effective steps to bring an end to the illegal occupation of Palestine consistent with the ICJ advisory opinion of 19 July 2024. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, President. My delegation has examined the report of the High Commissioner about the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. In this regard, we reiterate our categorical rejection to any impingement on the rights of the Palestinian people, whether through settler Israeli policies or by annexation or efforts to displace the brotherly people of Palestine. We reiterate our commitment to the Palestinian people and its right to establish an independent Palestinian state on 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, and would like to further mobilize the international community in favor of the rights of the Palestinian people in line with the UN General Assembly resolutions. The Kingdom will continue to stand by the side of the brotherly people of Palestine, whether through diplomatic offices or through the provision of humanitarian aid. And in conclusion, we reiterate that there is no sustainable and fair peace without the Palestinian people receiving all of their legitimate rights based on the international framework of legitimacy. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
Shukran, Sayyid Rais. Thank you, President. My delegation would like to associate itself with the statements delivered by the groups it belongs to, and we have taken note of the report presented by the High Commissioner. Mr. President, there are no words that will faithfully depict what is going on in the occupied Palestinian territories in light of the crimes and abuses by the occupying power and the flagrant abuses to international humanitarian law and the UN Charter. We are before a moral and human responsibility before the Palestinian people. After a year of war in Gaza, while we were hoping for an end to the bloodshed and an end to the operations of the occupying powers military, we're witnessing threats to evict the Palestinian people from Gaza and the West Bank and refusing the return of the refugees and continuing to target assets and infrastructure. We call upon the international community to shoulder its responsibility in favor of the Palestinian people, and we reiterate our principled stance in favor of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital on the borders of the 4th of June 1967, based on international legitimacy and the Arab Peace Initiative. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Thank you, High Commissioner, for your update. Canada fully supports the ceasefire in Gaza. Parties must negotiate subsequent phases with the purpose of ending hostilities permanently. There has been unbearable suffering and loss over the past 15 months, precipitated by Hamas's terrorist attacks on October 7th, 2023. We condemn these attacks and call for the release of all remaining hostages. Civilians, particularly women, children, journalists, humanitarian and health workers, have borne the brunt of this conflict. More than 47,000 people have been killed, alongside mass displacement, the collapse of basic services, including access to food, water, and medicine, and the destruction of civilian infrastructure. Israel must allow immediate, unimpeded access for humanitarian assistance. All parties should refrain from actions that put at risk the safety of civilians and must refrain from unlawful attacks on civilian objects, such as medical facilities and schools. There must be credible investigations into all allegations of human rights violation, including of sexual and gender-based violence in Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territories. Accountability is essential. Impunity is unacceptable. Canada remains committed to a two-state solution where Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace and security. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of Switzerland. President, Switzerland thanks the High Commissioner for his report. Switzerland is alarmed by recent images of the handover of the bodies of Israeli hostages and explosions in Bat-Yam, and by the ongoing intensification of military operations in the West Bank. Switzerland calls for the full implementation of the 15th of January agreement with a view to putting an end to this devastating war despite recent events. The Israeli occupation that has been ongoing since 1967 is illegal, as noted by the International Court of Justice, and it must cease. Transfer of populations is forbidden by international humanitarian law. Switzerland is deeply concerned by escalating violence in the West Bank, including in East Jerusalem, which is causing numerous victims, and also the massive destruction of infrastructure and major population displacement. At the same time, attacks, threats, and intimidations by settlers are worsening the situation. Switzerland firmly condemns human rights violations of international humanitarian law and human rights committed by all sides. We call for everyone to abide by their obligations and international law. Accountability and the fight against impunity are crucial for victims and for sustainable peace. Independent investigations should be carried out into all allegations of violations so that the perpetrators are brought to justice. Only a two-state solution with Israel and Palestine, of which Gaza is an integral part, can succeed.
Jordan.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
President, I'd like to thank the High Commissioner for his briefing, and I call upon him to continue his efforts based on his mandate. The advisory opinion that we've heard from the ICJ was clear from last year. The Israeli occupation in the occupied Palestinian territory is illegitimate. As is evidenced in the report that we've just heard, there are abuses and crimes that have been perpetrated, and the process that needs to be taking place is to ensure redress for the victim and to deter and punish the perpetrator. But in the logic of today, even when we see the killing and the destruction and the abuses, those things have become usual and natural in the occupied Palestinian territories. So are the cries of children. Nobody is listening to them in a flagrant affront to our common values. Mr. President, accountability is of the essence in the occupied Palestinian territories, and this is part and parcel of this Council's mandate, including other mandates. So the necessary resources need to be afforded to the High Commissioner's office to enable it to fulfill that mandate and to ensure that the principle of non-impunity is guaranteed and that we all put an end to the deprivation of the Palestinian people from their rights, freedom, security, and statehood. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Mr. President, Israel has been implementing a denial policy against Palestine, Palestinian people, and their inalienable rights for decades. After October 7th, this policy has turned into an unconscionable aggression. Israel has killed 50,000 Palestinians, majority of them women and children. Millions of Palestinians in Gaza were displaced from their homes who faced only rubble upon their return. Palestinians in Gaza are unable to access basic human needs, clean water, healthcare and shelter. Humanitarian aid must be provided unhindered. Those who commit crimes must be held accountable before the law. Turkey has submitted its declaration of intervention before the ICJ. Mr. President, the current ceasefire must be made permanent. International community should insist that Israel walk the path of peace. The Israeli occupation of the West Bank is expanding. The recent attacks of Israeli forces to 3 refugee camps have led to forced displacement of nearly 40,000 Palestinians. There are extremist groups in Israel calling for the annexation of the West Bank. The international community should oppose firmly Israel's occupation attempts and aggression. For the sake of peace in the region, the establishment of a sovereign, independent and contiguous Palestinian state based on pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital should no longer be delayed. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, President. Australia welcomes a ceasefire in Gaza after 15 months of conflict and a devastating loss of civilian life.